If I asked you to name one thing that would be a deal breaker and cause you to walk away from an MMO completely, permadeath would probably be pretty high on the list. And yet, as of today, Star Citizen still plans for the character that you create when 1.0 goes live to eventually die permanently. It's a little more complex than that, of course, the devil's always in the details. Death of a Spaceman has evolved a lot since Chris Roberts originally wrote it down, and CIG's been giving us pieces of info for 13 years now about the current state of the vision. In this video, we'll break down everything that's been said and try to find out if any version of permadeath could work in Star Citizen. In my previous video, I did an analysis of the original Death of a Spaceman document and the reasoning behind it. Chris spends a lot of the document explaining why he thinks the system is necessary to solve one of the biggest problems in games, the YOLO mindset that cheapens the entire experience. I recommend watching it, link in the description, but I'll summarize it here. The 2013 pitch goes like this. Your character can die multiple times like lives in an old school arcade game. Those are Robert's actual words in the document. However, every death does permanent damage to your character long term. You come back patched up with cybernetics or organic replacement parts, scars, wear and tear, and aging that never goes away. It was written with the original scope of Star Citizen in mind, so it references ideas like your ship being the real main character, and things like safe ejections and pilot recovery, concept borrowed from EVE Online, that haven't really survived the evolution of the vision of the game, where there are no quick transitions except in the case of real death. But the main idea is that every death is potentially your last. Eventually, after too many deaths, you won't wake up in a med bed like we do right now in the game. Instead, you attend your own funeral, watching it through the eyes of the heir of your choice. That heir inherits your ships, your money, your reputation, with a penalty, and everything that you did, including pissing off the UEE, would be remembered for your new character. The example they used was that a pirate's heir starts life with pirate-aligned factions, with the UEE already watching them, but since you aren't in as deep as you were, it would be possible to start changing your life if you wanted to, like a sins of the father type of thing. There's also a poison pill in the document too. Taking a headshot could instantly kill your character forever. It's a small chance, but it's there. You have to keep in mind the original version of Star Citizen was so different that those interactions would be rare, and you'd be seeking them out knowing the risks. And that's the problem. Right now, Star Citizen is far removed from the game that was envisioned back when the document was written. Siege of Origin is top of mind right now, and I won't get into the drama surrounding it again, but the premise is that it's a full-on assault mode where a team of up to 4 takes on hundreds of NPCs. Death is so likely that there are medical stations in it where you can respawn along the way, so it would seem that the current direction of the game is at odds with the vision presented. Let's take a look at the history of everything that's been said by CIG since 2013. Keep in mind from their statements, it seems CIG was never really completely sure what the system would become. Their responses ranged from affirming it to softening it. For years we heard nothing, until May 2018 where Todd Pappy, the former Star Citizen Live game director, answered a question from Jared during a Calling All Devs broadcast. In the video, he clarified that Death of a Spaceman was still the plan, and that the real pain was supposed to come from each individual death, not just permadeath when your character's lost. He speaks of how when your character dies, you should lose all of your gear, come back physically changed with scars or replacement body parts, and gradually you'll age and wear down over time. Essentially, it was a nothing answer that didn't change anything we already knew. Then 2 months later, in July 2018, a post called The Shipyard Medical Gameplay hit the site. This was the introduction of injuries in the verse, essentially the first time they talked about different tiers of injuries a player can accumulate on their character. At the time, the system wasn't in-game yet. There was one line that stood out to me, quote, "As mentioned in Death of a Spaceman, the goal was to still show how many deaths and respawns your characters experienced, and for that to have a somewhat persistent effect over time. There's no mention of permadeath in this particular look at medical gameplay. To me, that reads like they were perhaps softening their design." Then, in October 2020, Chris Roberts and Tyrer were on Calling All Devs and discussed Death of a Spaceman one more time, and instead they doubled down on all of it. Roberts said it's still a core concept, that the goal remains making players care about keeping their avatar alive, and that after enough deaths, your character eventually can't be revived anymore. But we finally got new information too. They talked about 3 stages of death and the importance of medical teammates. The first stage is described as being downed, and your character can still be rescued. We have this now, in a limited way with the recovery and medical beacon system. The goal is in the future, you'll want to do everything you can to not have to click respawn. The second stage of death is when you die and you can't be revived, then you'll be reconstructed at the hospital from stored DNA. This would damage your DNA integrity and can eventually leave permanent consequences like cybernetics, prosthetics, and physical changes to your appearance. and they do commit to permadeath as well. But beyond that, they want to make dying economically painful, I assume as an additional credit sink. Their stated goal was to make recloning expensive and limited, so getting rescued by another player should always be preferable to the point that you'd practically do anything not to hit respawn. Your corpse and gear would remain in the world, allowing you to potentially return and recover what you lost if you had to. And at this point, they say that they're finally in the place internally where they can start building out the systems to accomplish that, but they also stress that those systems will come into the game gradually rather than a dedicated Death of a Spaceman patch. There's actually a really interesting potential problem buried in making regeneration expensive. Let's say that revival costs double every time you die. To be clear, this is my speculation. Then if money can somehow extend the number of times you're able to come back, you could end up creating the meths from Altered Carbon. If you haven't seen the show or read the books, it's a reference to Methuselah in the Bible, who lives 969 years. Nice. Not the drug, but Star Citizen's gonna have drugs, so everything's on the table, I guess. The richest people in the universe effectively became immortal because they could afford better bodies, with endless backups and everything necessary to keep themselves alive, while everybody else had to deal with eventual death. I'm not saying that CIG's proposed that, but Star Citizen, because of its MMO nature, will have naturally tons of players with serious wealth pretty quickly. Having more credits means you can preserve your character longer than everyone else. Death of a Spaceman has created a stratified class system that's built into it, on top of a game that already stratifies players based on the ships they bought. I don't know if I like that, but it would be kind of fascinating, especially if you can't swipe a credit card for it. It would give players a real reason to try to continue to exist, which is as real-world a motivation as any a game could ever have. Okay, sorry, I got carried away. Let's get back to it. Now, with the direction locked in 2020, it was time to start to write it into the overall universe and lore. In the post Lore Maker's Guide to Regeneration, dropped about a year later in September 2021 from the narrative team. The article introduces the concept of an Ibrahim Spear and the imprint, basically a stored record of your DNA. When you die, that imprint can be used to regenerate you into a new body, retaining the memories and everything that makes that character who they are. So now they finally had an in-universe explanation for why a person could be brought back. I think the most interesting part is that they could have just stopped here, but they didn't. It would have been a convenient way to get rid of Death of a Spaceman, which I'm still going to contest will be unpopular. They doubled down on it again, this time talking about how the trauma you suffered can carry over through what they call traumatic response echoes, which means those injuries and damage can persist even after you've technically been rebuilt. Now, as I'm thinking through that, it seems to me that that would create an incentive to die repeatedly, to force yourself into a new character, which would be theoretically in the perfect fighting shape. That would be the ultimate min-max approach, which is kind of completely the opposite of the intention. It's ironic. They even talked about adding age into it so you can't keep recloning as a fresh 20-year-old version of yourself forever. It's kind of one of those aw shit moments because I'm in my 40s now and the allure of being young forever in a video game is practically the only avenue left for me. But I digress. Over time, the imprint degrades, the effect of the regeneration accumulate, and eventually you reach a point where another regeneration just isn't possible. There's still permanent death with a softening mechanic, now it just has a much more elaborate explanation behind it, and supposedly a longer time frame. Like Cyberpunk 2077 has the word zeroed or flatlined, meaning death, in their lexicon. Trust me, use that word in Scrabble next time and you'll win guaranteed. Star Citizen has added the term wiped for death in theirs, which is kind of ominous. Then we went 3 more years until the 1.0 presentation at CitizenCon 2024, where they confirmed that Death of a Spaceman will be in the released version of the game, and it appeared on the new revamped 1.0 roadmap. And taking it a step further, we've started to see regeneration come into the game in a big way already. Most of the 2025 in-game patch events and lore surrounded the Regeneration Crisis, which was an in-universe lore way to start moving us towards the idea of Death of a Spaceman. In-game, the regeneration mechanics were failing for all but a small percentage of the population. Namely us as players. It humanized the idea of NPCs fearing death again as a motivation to try to cure death through in-game quest mechanics. That opens up really cool storylines, pushing scientific research into gray areas, including experiments on the space worms and even the Vandal. I won't spoil it if you haven't done the ASD facilities, but you'll see the culmination of that in an encounter at the end of one of the quest lines that will ultimately mirror our own character's journey through this regeneration. First time I did it, I didn't think much of it, But looking at it deeper now, I see what they were doing there. I love those blink and you'll miss it storytelling moments that are also completely disguised as normal gameplay, especially in a minor boss fight. But today, the medical system, as limited as it currently still is, has a surprising amount of death of a spaceman already implemented. If we're attacked, we get incapped before we die, and though it's rare outside of groups, still the mechanism exists to call for help and have other players revive us. We have different tiers of injuries that require specific med beds to cure them, and consumables to be used. And since Alpha 315's Deadly Consequences update, we bind our implants to medical facilities and regenerate there when we die. None of those things by themselves are death of a spaceman, but they're all pieces of the system CIG described years ago. That's why I don't think there's any question whether they still intend to do this. It's coming, and they seem very committed to it. I spoke in a previous video about the opportunity to exploit this system and grief the hell out of players that care about their avatars. Star Citizen, through its funding dynamic, already creates a pretty toxic stratification between the players. You have people that have spent thousands, and people that will go out of their way to kind of stick it to them. This is what pad ramming was for years at Port Olisar, and we see it today with people trying to attack players leaving their hangars. It's not a Star Citizen problem, it exists in all games, but adding in real money motivations and it's completely amplified. To me, that's one of the biggest problems, but not the only one. I'll be one of the people that intends to play Star Citizen as if my character was me and my choices in the game will be reflective of that. The question I have then is whether the game they're building is consistent with that vision. Because an instant siege of Orison where you're likely to die multiple times would be at odds with that. For all the cries of the AI sucks in those instances, would you really want to face a crack team of AI that have an equal skill level with the players? I'm sure some would, but Star Citizen needs its content to be accessible to the casual player. Does a difficulty slider make sense for the encounter? I don't know. I lean towards no myself, but give me your thoughts on it. I'm not opposed to death of a spaceman, I just need to know how long they expect a character to live. Because if I can lose a character I've spent only 20 in-game hours with, I can't accept that. It would be changing characters way too often. I don't think most MMO players are going to tolerate that either. Even if you multiply that by 10 and get 200 hours, I still think most people would reject it. But what if it's 1,000 hours? What if by the time Tim Katarn finally gets planted underneath that gravestone, after I've been playing him for 3 or 5 years, he looks like an older, rundown version of V from Cyberpunk, from all the replacement parts, and almost everything that actually matters to my account gets inherited to my next character anyway? Well, in that scenario, I can probably live with that. It's like a full generational change in the game, and the more I think about it, the more I dig it. Funerals could even be rare in-game events for friends, and the changing of the guard, so to speak. I've seen the same type of thing in Red Dead Online RP servers whenever somebody wanted to create or change their character. I think that's probably the only version of Death of a Spaceman that has any real chance of working in modern Star Citizen. The threat has to be real or the entire mechanic is pointless, but the actual final death has to be rare enough that losing the character feels like the end of a story instead of CIG deleting the representation of hundreds of hours of your life because some jackass shot you in the face outside a hangar. If Star Citizen releases and the player count tanks, this and non-opt-in PvP would probably be the first thing to go. I guarantee it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the verse.